back to my two-part review of Joss Whedon's Wonder Woman screenplay. If you have not seen part 1 yet, please watch that one first, and then come back so that you're all caught up. Part 1 ended with Diana liberating the refugee camp from Goshnak's evil reign and asserting herself as a dominant figure. Unfortunately, this doesn't last as we transition to dreary exposition. In Jenkins's version, the liberation of No Man's Land is followed with a breather scene of the protagonist resting at a local inn. They are compelled onwards by the simple continuing threat of the German forces and, as Diana naively believes, Ares. She believes that if she can kill Ares, who surely must be one of the German leaders, she can save humanity from all of warfare. Steve knows that her thinking is childish, but also thinks that attacking the leaders can help win the war, so he doesn't discourage this so much as warn her that she may not be able to do as much as she thinks that she can. Joss's version is bleaker. There is first a breather, where Diana and Ben chat about Steve and war, but it doesn't have the note of hope and healing that Jenkins's version does.
I haven't heard him sing in years.
They observe how the liberated but still suffering refugees display the worst side of humanity in their ragged state of hunger, with a father stealing food from his children. Of course, Joss is a notorious misanthrope.
There's a case to be made for hating people, called history. There's just, you look back, there's a lot of, it's nasty, there's the Holocaust and...
I suspect that this was inspired by Holocaust stories. Joss seems intrigued by the Holocaust. In a psychology class, I was taught about an anecdote where, in a concentration camp, a son stole food from his father, who starved to death while wondering why his son would do such a thing. The idea is that extreme conditions turn people into animals. Maybe Joss heard this story too. However, it doesn't ring true that refugees at the hour of liberation, who have just been handed sufficient food by aid workers, would behave so selfishly. Concentration camps are very artificial environments where social bonds among inmates are actively discouraged. In refugee migration cases, people aren't just concerned about surviving as individuals when they have hopes for the futures of their communities. We can see this more explicitly now, with the South American refugee caravan creating their own form of democratic government to manage internal aggression and ensure civilized behavior, even without a country to institute it. Jenkins's optimistic look on humanity makes for a more accurate depiction and for a better message for an uplifting superhero movie. Diana determines from her conversation with Ben that she is romantically interested in Steve, and she still has more to learn about man's world, so she follows him and the crew home to Gateway City, California, the Wonder Woman analog to LA, also home to our big bad Ares' influence on Earth, a knockoff of Wolfram and Hart from Angel, called Spearhead. This would be the evil corporate entity that made Warner Brothers uncomfortable.
I do believe, and this shows up in pretty much everything I write. It was in Wonder Woman, that we were basically under the heel of the gods, though we did not know it. There cannot be any connection to my having worked at News Corp for 14 years and my writing these stories, but there can be the fact that the one thing that is true throughout the world is this enormous inequity between rich and poor, between the powerful and the masses. I mean, the fact of the matter is, powerful people control the lives of everybody in this and every country, and they tend to use them and discard them, and it's a terrible, terrible system that has resulted in this country in economic chaos at last, because it's been crumbling for a while, and ultimately is a huge theme for me, is the theme of oppression. Because the terrible things that people do, they very often do at the behest of much more terrible people who don't have to do it themselves. The people who wage wars don't go to war.
It's a weapons development company whose headquarters are a spear-shaped tower that makes for an obvious phallic symbol, which overtly positions it as a masculine antagonistic force for Diana to oppose in her pacifistic feminist narrative. Similar to Marston's overt narratives, like literally naming a villain Professor Manly. Spearhead is given a lot of build-up, including an instance of the sexist cliché of killing off a female character, snooping around, while the guy with her gets away. It is the trope that the very first scene of Buffy satirizes by having the girl turn out to be the threat to the guy, so I think it's reasonable to believe that Joss would have revised away from it in a later draft. The exact cliché is slightly different, by having the woman be a Lois Lane-esque female investigative reporter, and the killer a male version of Strife, a villain character typically depicted as female.
A giant woman.
But I don't think that changing up gender dynamics on that level makes it of significant feminist value to subvert the overall sexism of the trope. The CEO of Spearhead is a woman named Arabella Callis, who worships Ares and puts up with Strife. They have a relationship similar to Tarkin and Darth Vader in Star Wars, Callis believing in the mundane, and Strife in gods and monsters. They have an evil plan to release a magically animated biomechanical two-headed dragon called Chimera, which she calls a machine, and him, a monster, as a weapon of war the likes of which the world has never seen.
The battle station is heavily shielded and carries a firepower greater than half the Starfleet.
Spearhead controls war from behind the scenes. They have analysts monitoring every conflict worldwide, and they make every effort to promote and profit from it as an evil conspiracy. It fits into Wonder Woman as a worship of Ares, and is reminiscent of Wolfram and Hart's non-denominational allusion to Satan worship, and their evil conspiracy of corporate interests. It's an overt criticism of the weapons industry, similar to the depiction of Tony Stark growing disillusioned with Stark Industries in Iron Man. Callis gets a good line. You want war, you need armies. You need an acceptable level of poverty and ignorance, despair, rage, religious fervor, and above all, fear. This would have been a timely commentary on George W. Bush instigating the Iraq War in 2005. It sadly is still relevant in 2019. Callis and Strife are fascinated by the report of a woman who defeated Albanian rebels without a single kill. She's not just a bleeding heart pacifist who doesn't pose any kind of threat to violent people, like the Republican characterization of Democrats who needed to be nudged out of power during the time of the Iraq War, because only violently minded Republicans could defend the people from foreign aggressors.
There are those who are blessed with the gift of aggression and the overpowering need to protect the flock. These men are the rare breed who live to confront the wolf.
A mentality for which Republicans would serve Ares' interests just as well as the foreign aggressors. Rather, Diana exists as a threat to Ares' whole game by opposing war itself.
Key to Wolfram and Hart. Don't let them make you play their game. You gotta make them play yours.
It's worth noting the very basic feminist content in having a prominent female character as the antagonist. She functions as a sort of counterpart to Diana as a strong woman. She broke through the glass ceiling to become this corporate executive. She is basically an XP of Lila from Angel because Joss couldn't be bothered to make something original.
I've had to be better, smarter, quicker than every man at Wolfram and Hart.
In this way, she suffers as an antagonist because, as an XP of another character, she doesn't properly function as a doppelganger to Diana. Upon her arrival to Gateway City, she decides to wander around in a standard scene of a fish out of water, for whom the familiar is unfamiliar, making us realize how weird our own world is. It's been done a lot, but this one specifically reminds me of Crocodile Dundee, with a tone similar to the scene in the Buffy film script, when vampire mayhem erupts around a high school football game. This was changed to a high school basketball game in the movie, but the closest we get to the scene in the film script is after the game when a sexist biker antagonizes Buffy, and she kicks him away and steals his motorcycle while he screams that she's a dyke. Yeah. Imagine Crocodile Dundee if half the encounters were sexists who antagonize and then get taught a lesson.
He's got a knife.
Got to get some.
That's a knife. Whoa! That's a knife.
Whoa! Whoa! I'm sorry. I don't actually need any right now.
This is simplistically feminist. Diana hurts the sexist antagonists and ultimately wins. However, its tone may be a bit too heavy for what should be an uplifting superhero movie. It feels like a feminist horror movie with grotesqueries featured and revenge fantasies played out. It's not anti-feminist, but it wouldn't work with the uplifting tone that Jenkins absolutely nails in her own film. Diana suffering sexism and fighting back is not as effective as Jenkins' shield scene, where the bullets aren't allowed to brutalize, and you can only feel Diana's strength. Also, there's a problematic depiction of a salacious sex worker, referred to in the script as a hooker, there to give flavor to the city as a patriarchal hellscape. She is later revealed to be Hippolyta, in disguise to keep an eye on her daughter. And I want this to be a feminist subversion of expectation, like the main Buffy the Vampire Slayer twist, where we disrespect Buffy as a shallow high school girl, but find that she is someone who should be greatly respected. The reveal of a disrespected sex worker as a supernatural badass could be a feminist subversion of traditional sexist disrespect of sex workers. I want to think it is. Hippolyta asks Diana who she is, referencing Hippolyta's previous caution, and Diana doesn't respond, and the scene is framed to make us dismiss this sex worker and her question. This framing could be set up for subversion, but the eventual reveal doesn't really expose disrespect of sex workers, just showing the importance of background details. It's possible that Joss was going for lending respect to the disrespected, and would embellish this in a later draft, but in this one, it's frustratingly absent. It seems to be just a twist that you didn't expect a sex worker to be Hippolyta, and that is ultimately disrespectful. Diana sees a drug dealer harassing a kid who owes him money, and she takes action in a basic feminist superhero move. She interrogates the dealer, finds out that he's a sex trafficker, working for a pimp named Clean, with a K, and she makes him take her to him. This effort leads her to Spearhead's testing grounds for Chimera, a low-class, dilapidated apartment building with occupants still inside. It's a commentary on corporations preying on the disenfranchised.
You may fire when ready.
What?
Diana sees a bunch of terrified rats and realizes that there's some kind of imminent disaster. She thinks it's an earthquake, so she lets the creep go and evacuates the building. This scene really reminds me of parts in Avengers Age of Ultron, where Quicksilver and Iron Man help rescue Sokovians during the third act. Strife shows up to stop her and realizes that she's an Amazon. She realizes that he's Strife, nephew and servant of Ares. They have an epic fight scene as the building collapses around them, and Strife has teleportation powers, and he teleports them away to different settings like Nightcrawler. X2 would have only been 3 years old at that point. Finally, it ends with Strife teleporting underneath the apartment building as it falls, and teleporting himself away to let the building fall on her. This time, Joss doesn't even pretend this kills her. Diana goes back to Steve's place, and they don't even bother calling Sully. They do some philosophizing about destiny and human nature, as sexual tension grows between them. Feminists tend not to like the way that he gets very direct about his interests, but it's a gag where he turns out to be accidentally touching the lasso of truth. I don't think it's a problem. It's not like Griffin just being rude.
What other depraved thoughts must you be thinking?
God, your daughter's got a nice rack.
With a bit of polish, the scene could be as good as the Angel and Kate scene in Angel Season 2, Episode 16, Epiphany. Like Angel, Diana has an epiphany that their reason for being there is to bring hope to the lost souls of Gateway City and to stop Ares. Diana, Steve, and the crew track down Clean in an action montage, roughly equivalent to Deadpool's "Where's Francis?" scene. The news does a report on Diana's various extraordinary activities across the city, branding her the Wonder Woman. Finally, they find Clean in a dance club called Olympus. The bouncer is obnoxious, so Diana knocks him out, and Griffin humorously takes his place while the others enter. He subverts expectation by only letting in mundane people and turning away two thin supermodel types, telling them to go eat something. Now, Joss previously required Jewel Staite to gain weight for her role as Kaylee on Firefly, so I think this is intended as a body positivity thing, but it ends up problematically skinny shaming. I mean, let's be clear, this is a one-off joke from a man of average weight, not some anthem to fat people like Meghan Trainor's All About That Bass, as the concept of skinny shaming is often refuted by.
Go ahead and tell them skinny bitches that.
As for Clean, he's a rich pimp with a posh booth and a scary posse. He has a lot of traits in common with negative stereotypes associated with black men and hip-hop aesthetic, with him speaking in a cliched dialect of urban slang. This has been wildly interpreted as racist in the most straightforward way, with Clean as a black caricature, but I think Joss probably intended him to be white, based on the fact that his race is never specified, while Joss doesn't shy away from specifying when people aren't supposed to be white. I'm not saying the script doesn't have racist aspects. Extras of color are in cliched roles, and one can infer a racist subtext to Clean's cultural markings, but I think it's a mistake to call Clean himself a racist caricature of a black man. Clean is very simply an overly macho antagonist for Diana to face in a feminist narrative, a la Professor Manley. In the modern world, the hip-hop aesthetic supplements this nicely. He does some masculine posturing, and Diana counters with a dramatic, "the reason why you suck" speech that specifically calls out his pretending to care about bling as part of a general anti-capitalist theme, reminiscent of Topher's discussions with Boyd in Dollhouse, and ends with a call for him to renounce his cruel ways and become a good person, saying that he wants to make a mark, and there's no greater legacy than people remembering your good deeds. It's unpolished, but there's a germ of a radical feminist message in there about Diana's feminine wholesomeness being superior to Clean's masculine destructiveness, shades of Marston's original pacifism. Diana then leaves Clean to think it over. A bartender hands Diana a drink that someone bought for her, and Steve warns her not to drink it, afraid that Clean is trying to roofie her, but she recognizes it as a gift from Bacchus, god of wine and debauchery. She drinks it, and pays tribute to him by going onto the dance floor and delivering a sexy performance that reminds me of Buffy's dance with Xander in the Buffy Season 2 premiere. My general thoughts about Buffy's dance apply here. It might be anti-feminist for her engaging in a sexual display for the benefit of two men, who could potentially serve the role as the vehicles for the audience, given that we don't understand Buffy's psychology very well. On the other hand, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is kind of a sexy show in general, and I personally don't have a problem with it. Time freezes for everyone but Diana and a servant, who lets her into a secret top floor where she meets Bacchus, Dionysus by the Greek name, but he's partial to the Roman name. In terms of Joss' first characters, he reminds me of a cross between Lorne from Angel, as the fun club owner, and the Master from Buffy as the sinister authority figure, who has a lot of gravitas within an enclosed space. Bacchus gives us some insight into the Greek pantheon. Most of the old gods are dead because so few worship them, either in their anthropomorphic avatars or in their earthly manifestations. Athena is noted among the dead gods, bringing doubt to Diana's convictions that her mission is ordained. Ares and Bacchus are of the few remaining gods because humans worship their manifestations of war and drugs, even if they don't care about the avatars of Ares and Bacchus. Yeah, okay. This really doesn't make sense. If we're counting cultural appreciation of things that gods are associated with as worshipping them, then there should be far more gods than Ares and Bacchus. People care about money more than war or drugs, so Hades, god of the underworld and all of its precious metals, should be the big bad. Aphrodite, goddess of love, should be partying with Bacchus. Hermes, god of messengers, should be flourishing in the internet age. Janus, god of thresholds, should be alive as long as doorways are being built. There are Greek gods for a lot of things. And as I mentioned earlier, Athena is traditionally the goddess of war and wisdom, but mostly war. Not just as a competent female fighter who can hold her own in a conflict if things get violent. She is literally the female counterpart to Ares. Marston had the Amazons worship Aphrodite, whose divine association with Eros fit with his conception of pacifistic female sexual submission, juxtaposed with female dominance. Joss isn't the first Wonder Woman writer to have the Amazons worship Athena, but it was a misstep to retain the Athena worship while pushing a Marstonist pacifistic agenda. Athena's wisdom is not pacifistic in nature, and trying to retcon Greek mythology to make it so just makes Joss look ignorant. I think he should have gone with Akalois, goddess of the moon, whose associations with menstruation and healing would make her work as a figure of feminist pacifism. Bacchus lived in New Orleans until Hurricane Katrina hit about a year before the script was written, and like people in real life, he was displaced by the disaster and moved to a new city, Gateway City, the closest thing to New Orleans. Of course, it was already occupied by Spearhead. Bacchus likes Gateway City and its people, and he senses that Ares will destroy much of it on his way to starting World War III, so he helps Diana take down Spearhead by telling her to go after Callus. She and Steve make an incursion on Spearhead and lasso Callus, who calmly admits to planning to destroy half of Gateway City for Ares, delivering some good lines that commentate on the Iraq War, like, "All the wars and all the weapons will never be as blessed as mass mindless fear." Her general diction and little jokes remind me a lot of Ultron. The way her security guards interrupt them with guns ablazing particularly reminds me of the salvage yard battle, interrupting Iron Man's standoff with him. They run through Spearhead's offices while the guards try to kill them. An innocent bystander is caught in the gunfire and inadvertently shields Diana before she and Steve barricade themselves in a secret temple to Ares and explore beyond that in what feels like a James Bond villain's lair. While having a moment to chat, Steve confronts Diana about her blind optimism getting the bystander killed. She just assumed that they wouldn't fire on someone unrelated to their conflict. Though her idealism may be heroic, it is also dangerous. This is a theme common with Serenity, the film that Joss would have just wrapped up the previous year, in which Mal is praised for being a sacrificial hero, while at the same time heavily criticized for endangering his friends and leaving a lot of dead allies in the process.
Do you know what the definition of a hero is? Someone who gets other people killed.
Joss's Wonder Woman takes this further to a commentary on Diana's superhero privilege. When the godly superheroes and supervillains fight, we don't care so much about the devastation left in their midst. It's mostly just set dressing. However, Steve identifies with the little people who get brutalized by these battles, and he calls out one of the godly superhero types for showing apathy akin to Spearhead's as an evil corporate entity. It's a relevant commentary on the genre, and timely considering that America was going through a cowboy phase of thinking that the world would be better off with Americans dropping bombs everywhere.
America, fuck yeah!
Captain America Civil War would make similar points. However, the execution here is clunky, with a drawn-out sequence of Steve yelling in Diana's face. It's supposed to be uncomfortable, but it's probably too much so to be effective, and just feels mean. This got significant backlash from feminists, who mostly just saw a man ranting at a woman about how much she's not a hero. Of course, Diana is more than a woman. She's a symbol of female power, while Steve is just a human man, so the scene can come across as an ordinary man putting a godly woman, symbolizing feminism itself, in her place. I can see how this would be a gut reaction and think that future drafts should revise away from this, but I think there is value in the concept of Steve as a symbol of the working class, lecturing a godly superhero about her privilege. It rings true to some of the uncomfortable truths surrounding how feminism as a movement has failed those of lesser privilege, so I don't think that Steve's gender should invalidate his ability to call out a woman's privilege in a way that has nothing to do with gender. Both Jenkins's version and the animated film have similar scenes to this. In Jenkins's version, Steve and Diana fight because her naive idealism makes her think that killing Ares would end war, when the truth is that humanity wars without much of his meddling. Her naivety also gets innocents killed. All those people she saved in No Man's Land die brutally because she makes a blunder. C'est la guerre. What makes this scene work is that it's much shorter and framed in such a way that we can empathize with both sides, while Joss's version focuses on making Steve sympathetic. The animated film has Steve nobly but short-sightedly rescue Diana instead of sacrificing her to stop Ares from accessing his full power, and he rants at her when she snaps at him. This version focuses much more on Steve ranting, but finishes with him getting vulnerable and acknowledging her worth. These examples show that Steve's ranting can reasonably work, and that Joss's version could be made to work with revision, even if it doesn't work in its current form. Strife attacks with a sword forged by Vulcan, a particularly masculine god. He destroys the lasso and holds the sword to Steve's throat. He shows Diana the chain that Ares originally used to enslave the Amazons before they escaped to Themyscira. And he tells her to submit or he'll kill the man that she loves. Steve tells her to sacrifice him, but she can't. The same flaw as animated Steve, interestingly, and submits. She does an exaggerated show of submission, while the magic chain assumes a phallic energy in a manner similar to the demon essence in Buffy, and binds Diana. She loses her power and goes with Strife in her dominated state. He takes her to a South American jungle, inspects her in a sexually dominating way, and then leaves her there to brave the elements in human form. An element from Marston's original work is that Diana's cuffs are both tools of empowerment and disempowerment. She can deflect bullets, but if a man chains her up, she loses her power. It was thematically about opposing men's domination of women in favor of women's domination of men and other women, derivative of contemporary feminist imagery that absorbed the ball and chain imagery of the abolition movement, from which the American women's movement originated. The 2016 Wonder Woman Earth 1 comics by Grant Morrison pay homage to Marston's kinkiness in glorious cheese. But without poking fun at it like Morrison does, it's hard to use the kinkiness well in a post-Marston era without coming across as simply fetishizing men dominating women in a manner that normalizes existing patriarchal culture. As could be expected, feminists really hate this scene. It is straightforward male domination of a woman who embodies female strength, and it draws out Strife's humiliation of her. I can see how it would feel fetishistic in a way that emboldens patriarchy rather than challenging it. However, anytime feminists criticize the depiction of women occupying submissive roles in BDSM, it becomes next to impossible to sort out nuanced criticism of the use of a BDSM theme from radical feminist hatred of BDSM altogether. To use the 2002 film Secretary as an example, I personally would criticize how the movie at times presents itself as too outlandish to take seriously when it depicts cases of questionable consent, while also presenting itself as a deep film about the human condition. I've heard a feminist say that this nuance does not matter, and that it should be dismissed because it doesn't have proper consent. And I've seen a third feminist say that it should be dismissed as misogynistic because a man dominates a woman, pointing at the bondage and calling that misogyny in its purest form.
It's love. Show some respect.
All three of our opinions could be summarized as a group of feminists having a problem with Secretary for its depiction of BDSM. Seeing that feminists have a problem with Joss writing a scene in which a man dominates a woman isn't very meaningful to me. So let's ignore the controversy and examine the scene itself. When Joss depicts a character being sexy, they are often portrayed with a red and gold color palette, meant to draw attention to their skin, to encourage the viewer to find their physical body attractive. We can see examples of this occurring with men and women alike in all sorts of situations. It's a common editing trick, but it is intriguing how often it crops up in his works when men are disempowered, and rarely when women are, suggesting that he may intentionally employ it to aid in feminist themes, in line with his stated goal to get boys attracted to strong women. However, he does employ the sexy reddish palette to endangered women sometimes, as with the classic pulp adventure bondage imagery in Buffy Season 2, Episode 5, Reptile Boy, which is probably the kind of thing that comes to mind when visualizing this Wonder Woman scene. For reference, this Reptile Boy scene ends with Buffy getting free and killing a phallic monster for a feminist message. So even this isn't as sexist as it may appear. Interestingly, the script describes Diana's appearance becoming ashen, suggesting that she could have this red and gold colorization from her first appearance to aid in her sexual attractiveness, similar to the women of Michael Bay's Transformers films, and that the process of being bound would transition her to a more natural appearance that would discourage the audience's sexual attraction to her disempowered state. It doesn't mean it isn't kinky, but maybe Joss would care about depicting classic Wonder Woman kinkiness in a way that would aid the underlying feminist theme and not subvert it.
Maybe what we should be looking for is something like Slayer Kryptonite.
Joss previously used the plot device of taking a female superhero and disempowering her to a human state to make an effective feminist message in Buffy Season 3, Episode 12, Helpless. I'm using superhero loosely, but I think we can see how Buffy is derivative of figures like Wonder Woman and Power Girl.
That's cool, Buffy's a superhero.
Power Girl to the rescue!
Joss specifically cites Kitty Pryde as inspiration. In Helpless, Buffy starts losing her superpowers for some reason. She panics as she starts to not be able to handle her sacred duties to fight monsters, as well as suffer from cultural misogyny without the ability to show up sexist with demonstrations of physical strength or to feel secure in sketchy situations. She descends from the position of a strong hero of the people to a weak damsel in distress who has to depend on the kindness of others like most women. Worst of all, it turns out that this isn't just an illness, it's a violation. Her father figure Giles, under protest but still willingly, followed orders to poison Buffy as a means of preparing her for a coming-of-age test in which the Slayer is disempowered and made to fight a particularly formidable vampire. Giles betrays his people by coming out and telling her the truth, but the damage has already been done.
I don't know you.
Giles and his boss, Quentin, are depicted as oppressive masculine antagonists in a feminist narrative. The audio commentary notes that the magic crystal Giles uses to tranquilize Buffy, so that he can poison her, has a distinctly phallic appearance, making the violation symbolic of masculine antagonism on the order of Spearhead's phallic imagery, if not outright sexual abuse. Buffy seeks help from her friend Cordelia, who represents what Buffy would be if she weren't the Slayer, and Buffy uses her wit to defeat the vampire when he abducts her mother. It becomes a story of female resilience against male oppression, and it is remembered as one of the better episodes in an overtly feminist show. The same basic plot plays out in Joss's Wonder Woman. Diana is brought low by masculine villains with phallic imagery and has to claw her way back up, while being subjected to the same cultural misogyny as any woman would. A local drug cartel abducts Diana and various local women for sex slavery. But one of the women is actually Hippolyta, there to remind her who she is.
Remember who you are.
Yeah, this is where we learn that she was a sex worker. Empowered by this reminder, Diana uses her wit against the slavers in a big action scene. Joss uses simple ambush tricks here, nothing as clever as Buffy tricking a vampire into drinking holy water, but it's the same basic concept of the depowered superhero relying on her intelligence. I can imagine Revision taking it similar places. Diana frees the sex slaves, being a hero even in her disempowered state. Joss makes Wonder Woman less kinky than Marston's version because Diana only frees them. She doesn't offer to be their mistress instead. You have no idea how kinky the Golden Age got. Through sheer rage, Diana pulls as hard as she can and breaks her chains. It may be flawed in terms of film verisimilitude, though no more so than Spider-Man Homecoming, making Peter find the strength to lift heavy beams through nothing more than sheer will. But it's based on Marston's original imagery showing her breaking chains of male domination, in turn based on first-wave feminist images. It's not just that Joss has a kink, or even that Marston just had a kink. Wonder Woman has origins in real feminist imagery with an authentic kinky theme born of kinky feminists, created for the purpose of making people feminist. Maybe Wonder Woman should evolve, but Joss putting Diana in chains of male domination so that she can break her way out of them is not innately anti-feminist, and can reasonably be called a feminist story, albeit a kinky one. Honestly, I suspect criticism of this to be rooted in extremely problematic anti-BDSM radical feminist ideology that holds submissive women to be brainwashed by the patriarchy. And I consider it one of the chains holding women down to be broken in a display of rage. If given the opportunity for more polish, I can see the plot becoming something as good as Helpless. Hippolyta gives Diana her invisible jet. We are given a hand-wavy explanation that Themyscira is actually technologically advanced, but all of the sci-fi stuff is invisible, which is more than the animated film gave us. And Diana flies to Gateway City to save the day, as Spearhead releases the Chimera. Meanwhile, Clean has a change of heart, so he helps Steve and the crew expose Spearhead to the world. Clean sells the location of the crew's hideout to Callus, and when Strife shows up out of nowhere, the crew catch him on streaming video from 100 angles, too complex to fake. Considering that Silver Pictures made The Matrix, this may have been an attempt to take advantage of their 360-degree camera set. This confrontation with Strife might have been in bullet time. Steve then gets Strife monologuing so that he reveals Spearhead's evil plan to the world.
Can't stop the signal, Mel.
Steve tries to trick Strife into bringing Diana back, but he doesn't go for it. The Chimera attacks and brings the building down. It then becomes a giant monster movie, with the crew essentially trying to outrun a kaiju, rampaging through the city, while they have Strife on the roof of their car like a Terminator. Just when it looks like their goose is cooked, Diana swoops in with invisible ramming? I guess her anti-gun policy extends to weapons on jets. She knocks Strife away with her jet, and the Chimera goes after her. It flies like Mecha King Ghidorah, and she attacks it in the least practical way. Ramming! She cuts off one of its heads with a wing of her jet, and it fortunately isn't the Hydra, so it's half dead now. She pauses to reunite with Steve, and it's emphasized that she is now back to full strength, has a brighter Wonder Woman outfit, a new sword, and a replacement lasso of truth. Her disempowerment is over, and she's now a better superhero empowered to stop Spearhead. Steve runs up to her and immediately apologizes. So the overall message doesn't support any kind of male domination of the woman who symbolizes female power. Diana has to interrupt him because they have to go fight the bad guys now. A cute subversion of the always time for drama trope. Klein and his posse join them. The scene is now very similar to the scene in the Avengers, where the various Avengers have gathered on the New York street, while Thanos' forces are attacking, and they're eyeing the giant monster flying around. The scene represents the joining together of the desperate heroes to fight as one team. It's a good scene. This gives me confidence that, with revision, Wonder Woman could have been the Avengers before it was the Avengers. While Klein rescues the civilians like Captain America would in the eventual Avengers film, Diana jumps up buildings like the Hulk would and jumps onto the Chimera. Strife fights her on top of the giant monster, like Loki and Thor, on top of Stark Tower. These ideas were floating around in Joss's head years before the Avengers. Diana kills the Chimera and rides it down to Earth, and Steve shows up to help her take down Strife. If the male love interest were to kill the misogynistic male antagonist who's given her such trouble, that wouldn't be much of a feminist message. But Diana is the one to take him down. When Strife disapparates, she grabs his own phallic spear and throws it at Steve, trusting that Strife will apparate in front of him to kill him. Strife gets impaled. Diana overcomes her flaw of being unable to trust Steve's willingness to die for the greater good, which started the whole subplot, and it's a bit of a disrespect toward the security of Steve's person that, for better or worse, elevates Diana to the level of respect given a standard male action hero. It is notably similar to a scene featuring two male cops in the 1994 film Speed, for which Joss worked as a script doctor, reportedly writing almost all of the dialogue.
Shoot the hostage.
What?
Take her out of the equation. Go for the good wound and he can't get to the plane with her.
Shoot the hostage.
Say goodbye, Harry.
The death of Strife prompts Ares to come to Earth. He rages at Diana and promises that she'll pay. She says that she now knows how to kill him. She will inspire the people of Earth to not worship war. He laughs because he knows that humanity is weak and will always war. But she has conviction that humanity is strong and can reject him. Ares leaves in a huff, swearing retribution. Hippolyta, watching at a distance, smiles and expresses pride in her daughter's accomplishments.
That little baby is all grown up and saving China.
Diana and Steve finally kiss. He wonders how she's such a good kisser when she grew up on an island of only women, teasing that he's imagining her kissing a bunch of women. She alludes to this being accurate and sexier than anything he could imagine. Lots of feminists take issue with the way this comes across as Joss framing lesbian activity as a neurotic tease for male consumption. I can definitely see this issue, but would also suggest that it would be hard for a PG-13 film to feature overt gay content in 2006. Even today, 13 years later, it is hard to get gay content in our PG-13 superhero movies. Even R-rated Deadpool barely has more than subtext. Jenkins's film featured an allusion to Amazonian lesbianism, with Diana turning Steve on with discussion of an Amazonian Kama Sutra that determined that male involvement was unnecessary to female sexual pleasure. And even that's not clear if it's about lesbianism or just masturbation.
I'm sorry, I feel nothing.
Joss's scene, while imperfect, would probably have been the most explicit gay content in any PG-13 superhero movie to date. This parallels the depiction of lesbian sexual activity in Buffy, where he was initially only able to depict Willow and Tara having lesbian sex through the metaphor of a magic spell.
We connected with the nether realms.
And an implied kiss only through a man, Xander, ogling them, in Buffy Season 4. Later in Season 5, he was able to get away with the first lesbian kiss in a primetime show, and in Season 7, the first lesbian sex scene on a primetime show. While the Season 4 kiss isn't something that we should be satisfied with, it is a good thing as a first step. Joss's Wonder Woman dialogue would also be desirable as a first step, and we don't even have that. In the wrap-up, Diana visits Greece and pays homage to a statue of Athena. Diana can sense that Athena is dormant, not dead. And if Diana can inspire Athena worship by leading the people of Earth to value wisdom over war, she can bring her goddess back, even though Athena is the goddess of war. I am sorry, but she is. It's a tribute to the Marstonist, matriarchal romanticism of the early feminist movement, and ends the film on an anti-war note. The final shot is of Diana defiant, transitioning to titles as the movie ends. Finally, I'm not gonna lie, this was hard to get through. As much as Joss is a master storyteller when he properly finishes his works, his early drafts are horrendous. Aside from it just being obnoxious to read, there are a fair number of problematic elements. The racism is probably my biggest concern. There are white protagonists, and lots of minor characters of color in negative stereotyped roles. Even if Clayne isn't supposed to be black, his cultural markings that designate him as a malicious ally like Jane derive from negative stereotypes from the black community. While Ben, who's supposed to be the black representation for the movie, is coded as a good guy for speaking in a stereotypically white manner. Looking back on the project in 2018, Joss admitted that his racial politics weren't too good, commenting with self-aware irony that he is now much more woke than he was in 2006. In terms of gender politics, the two biggest issues concern framing around the male gaze, with Steve lecturing Diana so much, and the way that sexualization is handled in the movie. I don't think that there's any inherent problem with the man lecturing the woman who symbolizes female power, as long as it's kept as a personal drama. But he argues so much in this movie that the drama turns into a movie where Steve lectures her and then apologizes. It would need to be truncated a lot. As for the sexualization, it's hard to say exactly what it would have looked like, but we can speculate based on Joss's other examples. In her basic design, Diana is supposed to be a sexy, kinky pinup girl, and appears as such in most media. It is probable that Joss would stick to that, in the same manner he stuck to Black Widow, appearing as the sexy spy. In comparing the depiction of her in the Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron to her initial appearance in Iron Man 2, we can see that Joss reduced the sexualization of her framing while keeping the character sexy, with her positioned in camera shots such that her eyes and sexualized body parts both intersect along the rule of thirds, drawing the viewer's eyes to both elements to appreciate her both as a person and as a sex object. Following this example, I speculate that Diana wouldn't have looked as sexualized as her appearance in Justice League, but would be more sexualized than her appearance in Jenkins's film. Various references to color in the script lead me to imagine a similar effect as Michael Bay's Transformers films, sexualizing the female leads with strong reddish-gold colorizations in almost every shot, if not as bad as Bay's more outrageous posing.
God, there's no life for sex.
You know, I think I liked you better when you were scared of me.
This technique of giving the sexy female lead a special color grading is used to sex-positive effect in the TV series Lost Girl, where the viewer is led to ogle Beau while appreciating her as a sort of anarcha-feminist spin on the femme fatale. She goes around and liberates various victims of oppression, while seducing a bunch of men and women alike, and dismantling cultural stigma around sex. She is carefully framed with respect by a creative team who knew what they were doing. With this example to show that it can work, it's possible that Joss could have done something similar to make a sexy Diana who is still framed with respect. But I suspect that without Lost Girl's particular sex-positive vision, it would have fallen short of this example, and instead been somewhere between sexy Black Widow and Cordelia in the shell bikini.
He's also got her wearing this flimsy swimsuit that covers, like, nothing.
Appalling. Disgusting.
Right.
While still making Diana what amounts to a sexy dominant woman, Jenkins avoids common tactics of sexualization. Her Diana's attractiveness comes from actress Gal Gadot being a physically fit woman playing a compelling warrior. The depicted sex appeal is closer to real-life attraction, where we are drawn to strong personalities, placed in center focus in the narrative structure, as well as her personal beauty, without special color grading and directed camera focus. However, beyond those two issues, I think that the script is fundamentally okay. To be a good movie, it's in serious need of revision, but I can see where one could reasonably be made from the example given. A lot of the feminist concerns are nitpicky and probably more motivated by bias against Joss than stemming from a coherent theory. The main issue feminists seem to have with it is that it features misogyny as a thematic element, and no one wants to watch Diana, the symbol of female power, facing misogyny and getting beat down for it, regardless of her pulling herself back up again. While that might be an issue from an entertainment standpoint, it's not like featuring misogyny would make it an anti-feminist narrative.
Well, I'm sorry, but not everything a man does is to further some misogynistic agenda.
Marston's comics to promote female dominance were almost all about Diana facing evil misogynists. Once upon a time, that was a radical feminist plotline. It seems to have shifted sometime in the late 90s and early noughties with the rise of the third wave, and now feminists want stories that normalize female power by not depicting any kind of resistance to it, and just showing strong women being successful. This model has been repeated so much that there's now a cultural amnesia about second-wave feminists originally liking stories about strong women fighting for inclusion in a boys' club environment has mirrored their own struggle.
I'm an Air Force officer just like you are, Colonel.
Wonder Woman as a franchise is rooted in first and second wave feminism, and Joss's version would have reflected second wave politics, as well as bringing in his own male feminist theory of using sex appeal to create empathy, which was already tested with Buffy. Him targeting the male audience is as legitimate a feminist effort as Jenkins targeting the female audience and trying to lift them up first and foremost. It's different. And I can understand if modern feminist audiences would prefer Jenkins's version, but it's not inherently sexist. Joel Schumacher took a similar approach in Batman and Robin with regard to Batgirl, saying in a 1997 Sunday Times article, "This gives the audience a young woman who's just as strong, just as smart, and just as heroic as the guys. And for the guys, they can see Alicia Silverstone in a black rubber suit being sexy." Schumacher splits up the two goals of a feminist identification figure and eye candy for the straight male audience, but Joss incorporates both together, using sex appeal as a channel to empathy and a disguise to keep boys engaged with the idea of strong women, even if they have an aversion to the abstract concept of feminism. In the same article, Joss says, "If I can make teenage boys comfortable with a girl who takes charge of a situation without their knowing what's happening, it's better than sitting down and selling them on feminism." He also said in the 2002 New York Times article, "If I made Buffy the Lesbian Separatist, a series of lectures on PBS, on why there should be feminism, no one would be coming to the party, and it would be boring. The idea of changing culture is important to me, and it can only be done in a popular medium."
The start of a powerful feminist movement. She will be carefully crafted psychological propaganda based on a lifetime of research into the human mind, inserted into a populist medium to further the cause of equal rights for women.
This idea is popular in Hollywood now. James Gunn and Ryan Reynolds achieved great things with their Guardians of the Galaxy and Deadpool movies that bring a message of respect in what at first appears to be mean-spirited dude bro humor. These movies have their critics, but they gave us great female characters, female relationships, and, with regard to Deadpool, normalization of pansexuality. This gets stuff done as much as Jenkins's feminine positivity. With 2017's Wonder Woman, she made a great third-wave feminist film empowering the female audience, but she could have followed in the footsteps of a good, with revision, second-wave feminist film, with thematic depth in strong anti-war and anti-corporatist themes, groundbreaking gay content, and empathetic sex appeal that drew teenage boys to the feminist movement. It could have been polished into a great film, and I think it's a shame that it was never allowed to realize that potential.